Another backstage incident at an AEW show, and yet another suspension. It must be time for the new season of All Elite Elementary. Oh, how I miss this show. This time, it was Brit Baker. She's not expected to be gone for long. She's going to be back in time for her match with Mercedes Moné at All In. But the news comes from Dave Meltzer in this week's Observer with Fightful and Wrestle Purists confirming other details of what happened. According to Meltzer, Baker was suspended for up to 2 weeks. It's either 1 week or 2 weeks, which would explain Mercedes' comment on Wednesday about the EVP suspending Brit, which is why she was not on the show. They just worked it into the storyline. She was suspended and fined by the company's disciplinary committee after an incident that took place backstage at the 250th episode of Dynamite back on July 17th, which was the night that MJF and Will Ospreay had their hour-long match. He says something happened in which Alicia Atout, who was hired by the company as a backstage interviewer in early June, it was actually her return to the company after she worked the first Double or Nothing in 2019. She overheard something that Baker said, allegedly, about MJF in the women's locker room. I guess Britt was venting her frustrations about MJF. Atout is MJF's girlfriend. They have been together for a year and a half now. She's the one that he used to insult at the media scrums. He would call Tits McGee. I guess you call someone Tits McGee enough times and they just fall at your feet. So she allegedly ran to MJF to snitch out Britt and tell him what she said about him, and then he confronted Baker about her comments. Now, there are conflicting accounts of whether or not he confronted her before his match with Ospreay, after his match with Ospreay. Fightful says he ended up punching a wall before his match. Fightful heard there was also a confrontation between Britt and Alicia, and that Will Ospreay even spoke to Britt at some point as well. It almost sounds like maybe he was trying to bring down the temperature a little bit. The conflict is said to be due to, quote, unresolved issues in the past, and that the two former friends had a falling out at some point over the past year. Anyway, Britt continued to appear on TV while AEW's disciplinary committee launched an investigation into the incident, and they spoke with multiple eyewitnesses the following week at the July 24th Dynamite, ultimately resulting in her suspension. What is this, fucking Law and Order? This is all I ever hear about here when I read these stories about the disciplinary committee, all these interviews with eyewitnesses. You would think there's a fucking body on the ground. I mean, this is like a reality show waiting to be filmed. Fightful also claims the situation intensified when Baker allegedly cursed at Atout and demanded her removal from the women's locker room, which was perceived as an overstep by Baker. Well, look, I mean, I'm sure Britt fancies herself the queen bee of the women's locker room, so if she really did do that, she probably saw it as her role. Look, I have seen so many different accounts of what happened, that MJF walked into the women's locker room to confront her, which sounds like a terrible idea if he did. I don't know if he did or if he punched a wall, if it was even in the women's locker room or not. This all sounds like such petty nonsense. The key line in this entire thing, as I was reading this, is that this all stems from problems in the past that were not addressed. That was the crux of the whole CM Punk Hangman Adam Page debacle. Problems that existed that people knew about, that should have been taken care of and weren't, and they were allowed to fester, and we all see how that turned out. This seems to be a recurring theme in this company. Problems with top talent not being addressed early enough, they fester until it all blows up. I don't know what Brit Baker's issues are or are not with MJF. The way the story was presented, I thought maybe it had to do with him and Ospreay getting an hour of television time on that show, which makes no sense. If she had an issue with that, take it up with the man who formatted the show. But if they had a falling out long ago, then something else led to this, and I don't know what it is. All I know is whatever happened, can't be all that serious if she was suspended and then took part in that angle at Comic-Con with Mercedes where Tony Khan made their match official for All In. Right? That Comic-Con thing would have happened after her suspension. The thing is, you can suspend her for a week, you can suspend her for 2 weeks, but if she is still taking part in angles or if she is still getting paid during her time off, what kind of punishment or deterrent is it really? right? It has no teeth to it. You want to really send a message, you want to really punish her, you pull her from the match at Wembley Stadium. But they didn't do that. And so this is all meaningless. I would love to know what it was that she said that got her suspended, but not MJF for confronting her in the first place. Fightful says the decision to suspend Baker has been viewed internally as potentially biased, favoring one side's version of events over the other. But Andrew Zarian on the Mat Men podcast said this is not a one-off when it comes to Brit Baker. One confrontation was not the reason for her suspension. This is not the first time something like this has happened with her where there has been negativity. This is not the first time there have been issues with Brit Baker. That makes a little more sense to me that she wouldn't be suspended just for this one thing, which sounds fairly benign, that it may have just been a tipping point with her. But again, if there are issues with Brit Baker, if she is causing problems, and I know there have been stories in the past and her and Thunder Rosa and all kinds of stuff, if Brit Baker is causing problems, if this is not the first time and you want to punish her, I don't see what a 2-week suspension really accomplishes. Like, do you think these issues are just going to magically go away? Why does this sort of thing keep happening in this company? And who keeps leaking it? Someone is obviously leaking it to make one side or the other look bad. I mean, look, it's not as if there aren't disagreements between talent and other promotions, including WWE. People who don't get along, people who don't like each other. Look at MVP and all the comments he continues to make on Instagram about Triple H in people's replies, calling him a liar and calling him all sorts of things. Remember when Gallows and Anderson got fired years ago? AJ Styles, he was pretty vocal on that first Twitch stream that he ever did about hating Paul Heyman and citing Heyman as the reason why he wanted to go to SmackDown because he couldn't stand to be around him. He didn't trust him. He thought he was a liar. He couldn't even stand to look at him. He said this while working for WWE. This is only 4 years ago. It's not like you can't find examples of dirty laundry being aired on that side too. But what you don't hear about is it causing a scene in the locker room or causing all sorts of drama, people being suspended or let go, investigations. And if it does happen, it's obviously handled very quickly and very discreetly. It just continues to make AEW look Bush League when we hear about stuff like this happening. I said it even after the CM Punk stuff. Just because they got rid of CM Punk did not mean that all of their problems magically go away. He was the most visible because he was their biggest star. And he actually got into fucking brawls with people, throwing punches and trying to choke people and fucking chairs being thrown around and suspensions and potential lawsuits being threatened and non-disclosure agreements being signed. That's quite a bit different than something like this. So, of course, that was going to get a lot of attention. But I never said that if you removed CM Punk, all of their problems magically go away. It starts at the top. And I really feel like if the man at the top was someone people actually feared or respected, or they thought, you know what, I better not do something stupid here because if I do, I may lose my job, or there may be real consequences for my actions. I don't think AEW would even need a disciplinary committee in the first place. But if Zarian is right, and this is not the first issue involving Brit Baker, I mean, the woman comes back after almost a year gone, and within 2 weeks, she's already suspended, then that needs to be addressed. But, I'm sure giving her 2 weeks off the road will fix all of that, and everything will just be hunky-dory. Quick note on Daniel Garcia, who we have not seen since MJF destroyed him and sent him out on a stretcher back on the July 3rd episode of Dynamite. The reason they shot that injury angle was because Garcia's contract with AEW is up soon, and he has yet to sign a new deal. Now, they want to keep him, but he wants to explore his options and is said to have interest from WWE, among other places. Tony Khan believes that Garcia is ultimately going to stay, but if he doesn't, what they did was they protected themselves by killing him off, not unlike the way WWE killed off Ricochet, and they used it as a way to make Bron Breakker look stronger. The way they did it here was brilliant because it gave them a way to turn MJF heel again and make him look as vicious as possible to build to the first match with Will Ospreay. So now the ball is in Garcia's court. He can re-sign with AEW and immediately be slotted into a program with the top heel in the company. Or he can go to WWE and probably be a part of the NXT roster heading into their debut on the CW network. Because I don't see him as a WWE main roster guy. Certainly not right out of the gate. Like, I have a much easier time seeing someone like an Ethan Page or Ricky Starks as a Raw or SmackDown guy on day one. And they still sent Ethan to NXT. And I'm sure Starks will end up there too if he goes to WWE. But I have a lot easier of a time just visualizing them having success on the main roster than I do Daniel Garcia. I just don't see it with him. But that's a decision that he needs to make. Now, he's only 25 years old. So it's kind of like the MJF thing where there's plenty of time for him to go to WWE if that's what he ultimately desires to do. If he signs, let's say, a 3-year deal to stay in AEW, he's still only 28 years old at the end of it. So he's in a good position either way.